What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show. And I'm the home of Epic Conversations, and I'm the host of Epic Conversations, 2020 Best Podcast News Award winner, 2018 Innovation Award winner given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. I also host the only online show in the world for dads and fathers that's sponsored by Dove Men Care. It's also co-sponsored by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization. And through that collaboration with those organizations, I've been able to reach out directly or indirectly to over 75,000 fathers around the world this year. I also am the board chair for an organization called the Global Food and Drink Initiative that amplifies Blacks in the diaspora that are doing their thing and doing great things in food, drink, and travel. As always, I'd like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. For those of you who know a little bit or even know a lot about what I do online, I'm very passionate about dads, fathers, and men. And a little context to our conversation today. A few weeks ago, I was listening to On Point, a great online show out of WBUR out of Boston, hosted by Magna Chakrabarti. I love that lady's name. I love, like, when she says it, I absolutely love. And one of my bucket list things is either to call in and say hello, Magna, or be on that program. But there was a great conversation about men and the state of men in today's society. And both the gentlemen I reached out to, and one of them is going to be with us in just a moment. And we're just going to give a little background about him. And he's incredible gentleman and lots of wisdom and evaluated experience when it comes to manhood and all things men. Dr. Ronald F. Levant is a Professor Emeritus of Psychology at the University of Akron, past president of the American Psychological Association and APA Division 51, and a two-term editor at the APA's Division 51 quarterly journal, Psychology of Men and Masculinities. He has developed and evaluated a number of measures designed to assess a variety of gender constructs. His signature contribution has been in establishing an empirical foundation for the, quote, normative male alexithymia. I know I butchered that. He's going to correct it for me, quote, hypothesis. In addition, he helped the ART, and he can help me with this because I'm not used to getting these multi-syllable words, a brief psychoeducational intervention designed to remediate normative male alexithymia. I'm going to try. I know I didn't get it right. I got to try because you don't want me to slip and down like that, in order to prepare men to engage more fully in psychotherapy. His most recent book is called The Tough Standard, his 19th book, and he's going to be joining us today to talk about men and violence. So welcome, Dr. Levant. How are you?
Well, thank you. I'm well, and I hope you are as well.
Well, I am, even though I can't pronounce some of those words, but I tried.
Well, thank you for trying.
Well, there you go. Well, first of all, thank you for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule to be with us today. And as many people, I'm very passionate about men and fatherhood. And when I heard you on that program, I said, got to reach out, because your wealth of evaluated experience is going to be beneficial not only to my audience, whatever gender they are and wherever stage you are in life, that I needed to have you on today. So thanks again. Looking forward to a rich conversation.
Thank you.
Good. Fantastic. What I always like to do with new friends is I gave a little bit of a bio, but if you can spend a little bit of your journey in this, I don't like to say work, passion, and I don't think it's a work for you anymore. It's a passion. If you could just share with our audience some of your journey, where you grew up, etc., and how did you get into this part of your manhood?
Sure, Dr. Vibe. Well, in psychology, we say all research is me-search, meaning that basically psychologists tend to study what's meaningful to them. And my graduate studies, during the time I was going to graduate school at Harvard, I was performing the role of a semi-custodial father of a pre-teenage daughter. My wife and I had divorced. My wife and my daughter lived in New York, and I lived in the Boston area. And I would visit my daughter on the weekends, and during the summer, because my first wife liked to travel, my daughter would live with me. And I was pretty much a flop as a father.
Honest, most of them are.
Yeah. Well, and, like most men, I refused to admit that. And I just sucked it up and kept on trying. And then I saw this movie. This is going way back, Kramer versus Kramer. It's a movie with Dustin Hoffman, Meryl Streep, playing a divorcing couple. And the parallel to my own life was kind of bizarre because Meryl Streep was going to travel. In this case, she was going to go to California to quote unquote find herself. Mm-hmm. That was the thing back in the 70s. And the character, Mr. Kramer, played by Dustin Hoffman, was basically a full-time caregiver for his 8-year-old son. And as I saw him making a big as mess of things as I felt I was doing, in my family, it suddenly dawned on me that maybe I'm not the only guy who, doesn't really know how to do fathering. And maybe it's more men of my generation, because Hoffman and I were approximately the same age, same generation, baby boomer type men, that maybe men of my generation really weren't prepared for this kind of role. And life has changed, gender roles have changed, women are now in the workplace, and suddenly we're expected to perform roles that we really were not prepared for. So, that kind of got me started. I was teaching at Boston University, and I did a literature review. That's kind of what we do. Is I looked at are there any studies on parent education, and do they include dads? And I found out no. All the reviews of literature on parent education programs didn't even mention whether the parent groups included fathers. So I concluded that, parent education was synonymous with mother education, that fathers' roles were changing. This was at a time when you're starting to see fathers more visibly involved in care. I lived in the Boston area. You could see dads with infants in snuggly packs or pushing strollers around Harvard Square. And it was like, okay, things are changing. So with one of my graduate students, Greg Doyle, we kind of developed a program of parent education for fathers. And I was giving an amazing opportunity to have release time and get access to grant money to create a project for the community. So I created the Boston University Fatherhood Project,
wow,
which provided parent education for dads. And it ran for 5 years. We always filled our classes. There was a demand for this. And we would have, the class consisted of about 8, 10, 12 guys who would meet once a week in the evening. And we had a room with more video equipment. Video was very cool in the 80s. We had more, and I had a grant, so I had more video equipment than any sane person would want. And it was also kind of street cred with the guys. They would come in, they'd see the equipment and say, oh, these guys have got it going on.
Gadgets.
So basically what we would do is men would kind of talk about some of their problematic encounters with their kids. And we would role play it, and tape it. So somebody would play the dad, somebody might play the kids, somebody might play the wife, what have you. And whatever the circumstance, we would role play it. They would play back the video, and we'd study it and try to break it down and figure out how can you handle that better. And it worked pretty well. Greg did his dissertation on that, and then subsequently got it published as a journal article. But that got me started. Now, you mentioned this term, alexithymia.
Thank you. You do it so well.
It's basically composed of a series of Greco-Roman roots that literally means without words for emotions.
Okay. Got it. I
started to see evidence of this in the men that I work with. Let me recount an interaction I had with one of the dads.
Sure.
Came into the class, and he was, kind of non-verbally kind of showing signs that he was out of sorts, not really happy. So I asked him, I said, what's the matter? And he said, my son stood me up for the father-son hockey game, and he'd been looking forward to it. And I said, well, I can see how that would be disappointing. I don't think I said that. I understand. I think I asked him, how did that make you feel? And he looked at me and he said, he shouldn't have done it. And I said, okay, but how did you feel? And at this point, I really didn't know anything about alexithymia, and I'll say more about that.
Sure.
But I realized afterwards, later on, that asking many men how they feel is a non-starter. Because many men can't tell you how they feel, or they don't want to tell you how they feel.
Right.
But in this case, so we role played the situation. He played himself. I had another father play his ex-wife as she delivered the news that his son had gone to a bar mitzvah and forgotten about the game. And we videotaped it and played it back. So I'm sitting with him. I'm saying, look at yourself in the monitor. His face falls into a frown when he gets the news. His shoulders slump. I said, watch yourself. How did you feel? This is the guy. His name was Don. I don't know. He's rubbing his chin. I guess I must have felt disappointed.
Right.
Myself, I guess I must have felt disappointed with this.
I guess. Wow.
I thought to myself, how might a mother feel in an analogous situation, like her daughter standing her up for a shopping date?
Yeah.
Well, I thought to myself, she might say, well, I was surprised because it's not like her to act that way. Then I was hurt that she acted with so little regard for my feelings. Then I was worried that maybe she was upset with me, and this is her way of showing it. And then I was disappointed and annoyed that I built my whole day around this, and now it was ruined. I guess I was disappointed on the one hand, surprised, hurt, worried, disappointed, annoyed on the other hand. I said, what's going on here? Why do mothers and fathers, have such different ways of explaining their experience?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I did my doctoral work at Harvard, I focused on child clinical psychology. I wanted to work with teenagers. And so I knew more than most of my classmates about developmental psychology, which is a branch of psychology. And I knew there was a subfield in developmental psychology called emotion socialization. So I decided to go back and review the literature there. And what I found was amazing. And it really helped me understand why so many men were like my Don in this class. So the research, in short, shows that male neonates are more emotionally expressive than female neonates in about 18 studies. But neonates don't do very much. These are children hours after birth. They cry and they sleep. But that male greater emotional expressivity continues up through about 1 year of age. There was a study at 6 months and one at 1. And these studies back then were done in the 70s, actually videotaping the parents and the children in their home and then coding the videotapes. They're fairly elaborate studies and required a lot of funding. We don't have funding for that now. At 2 years of age, girls started to show greater verbal expressivity of emotions. And between 4 and 6, boys appeared to lose their facial expressivity. They became little stone faces. So what's happening to boys between 4 and 6? Well, they're in preschool and school. They're subject to the gender police. The other boys are reinforcing the norm. There is a norm, a masculinity norm, to restrict the expression of emotions. That's one of the masculinity norms. And so they were learning to do that. So based on that, and back up for a second and talk a little bit about masculinity norms. Some people some of your viewers may think that masculinity is synonymous with being male. And it is not, because there are many ways to be a male, and not all males are masculine or to the same degree. Masculinity is a variable that can be measured. We measure it in various ways. And the way we think of it is a set of norms for thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of boys and men. That is, the beliefs about how boys and men should think, feel, and behave. And there are various ways to measure this. I have one scale called the Male Role Norms Inventory that specifies 7 masculine norms, one of which is to restrict the expression of vulnerable and caring emotions. Vulnerable emotions, those are emotions that make you feel vulnerable, like fear and sadness, and caring and connection emotions like fondness or missing somebody, because the most honored way to be a man is to never need anyone or anything, really. Yeah. And that boys who are socialized to conform to these norms, naturally enough, grow up to be men who have a difficult, who have difficulty in telling you what they're feeling and reading their insides. They have difficulty identifying and describing their emotions. So that was my normative male alexithymia hypothesis.
Okay.
We talk funny in academia.
It's all good. It's all good. I'm going to transition to the most recent book, The Tough Standard.
Yeah.
The Hard Truths About Masculinity and Violence. Why this book at this time?
Thank you for that question. Well, again, I can't speak for the Canadian experience, but I'm assuming is somewhat similar to the US. But the United States is awash in violence. There is essentially a mass shooting that occurs on average every single day. And every single day in the United States, 30 people die of a gunshot wound.
Wow.
I mean, it's just everywhere. And, you can't go a day without hearing about some of this. So I've been concerned about violence. I mean, I've been studying masculinity for 45 years, and I've been concerned about violence for quite some time. I was a little bit frustrated that, whenever there's a mass shooting, the gender of the shooter is never mentioned, and over 90% of the time it's a male, a boy, or a man. Shooters are overwhelmingly males, and the question, the role of masculinity and all those norms I was describing, is never brought up. So that was really my motivation for doing this book. It was really take a deep dive. This field called the Psychology of Men and Masculinities, I had a hand in creating. I was one of the lead figures in establishing a division in the American Psychological Association on the psychology of men and masculinities, and it was formally approved by the APA in 1995. We'd been working on it since about 88, and we got it approved. And we have a journal called the Psychology of Men and Masculinities, and we've published a lot of research. And so I took a deep dive into all that literature, plus literature published in other journals, and tried to identify, what it is about masculinity that leads some men and some boys and men to commit violent acts. As I said, the vast majority of violence is committed by boys and men, yet the vast majority of boys and men are not violent. So it has to be something specific about masculinity that varies among men, among boys and men. And essentially what I found is that men who feel that they do not live up to their internalized ideal of being masculine are are the men who are linked with physical violence, and I also connected it to gun violence. I'll explain that. But so in psychology, you really can't study violence directly. You cannot create an experiment that leads to violence. That would be unethical. So you have to study it indirectly, and you study it through self-reports of prior or current violence. You study it through scales that, psychologists develop scales to measure thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So scales that measure aggression or hostility, or you study it through proxy variables like punching a punching bag. Okay. So it's indirect. Again, we can't directly get at, why do men commit gun violence? Because that just couldn't happen. And essentially, the literature suggests that whether you measure this feeling among men that they don't measure up, we have a technical term for it called discrepancy strain. That's a discrepancy between your ideal self and your real self when you feel you don't measure up. And we can measure it with scales. We have a couple of scales to measure that. And we can also experimentally induce it. And let me explain what I mean by that. So this is a typical psychological experiment. You get 100 men. You randomly assign them to either the experimental group or the control group. That means, every man has an equal likelihood of being assigned to one or the other. You give each group different instructions. You tell the experimental group to braid the hair on a mannequin doll, those little dolls that they use to display clothes, and put pink ribbons in the hair. This is a feminizing or emasculating task. And then the control group is given masculine tasks like braiding rope to strengthen it. After the tasks are done, you give the men in both groups the choice of sitting quietly in a room or punching a punching bag. The results are the men who have been emasculated overwhelmingly opt to punch the punching bag to reassert and demonstrate their masculine prowess. Once you've threatened their masculinity, they have to come back and show that they're still masculine.
Exactly.
So we experimentally induce this sense of discrepancy by making them feel they've been feminized, but then so there are a lot of studies that show this linkage between the kind of the indicators of violence and feeling like you're not measuring up. Okay. But there are two parts of this that are particularly compelling. One is that I found evidence for this phenomenon not only in psychology but in other related social science disciplines, sociology, criminology, and anthropology. Now, in academia, we tend to live in little silos and we only talk to ourselves and don't talk to our neighbors. That's kind of the way it is. I've been a professor all my career, so I'm used to it, but most people think it's pretty odd. But
I love your humor. I like your humor. It's good. We all need to. That's a lesson, men. Learn to laugh at yourselves.
So, but in this case, I went outside my comfort zone and looked at the literature in these related disciplines, and I found evidence for the same phenomenon. But it gets better than that. I wanted to connect it to actual violence, but I knew I couldn't do a study that would do that. But I wanted to look at anecdotal accounts of gun violence to see if I could find evidence that discrepancy strain was at work in there. So 3 things. One, there's a database of school shooters put together by a psychologist named Peter Langman.
Yep.
And it's a searchable database. So I searched it for masculinity, masculinities, manhood, all of these kind of things. And I got 18 cases in which those terms came up. And then I read the case histories, which consist of school records, health records, court records, and the shooter's own writings like manifestos and diaries and video, YouTube videos and things like that. So I read the records on these 18 people, and lo and behold, every single one of them showed evidence of discrepancy strain, of feeling they didn't measure up. So, okay, so now I've linked it to actual shootings, mass murders. The next arena was in looking into murder-suicides. These are phenomena where somebody kills a bunch of people and then kills himself. And obviously that overlaps with school shooters, if you think about Columbine, for example. But it also, so it's in school shooters, but it's also in two other places. It's in domestic disputes, where a man kills his family and then kills himself. And it's also in workplace disputes, where a man kills his coworkers and then kills himself. And in looking again for this, I found a study that had been based on news accounts or any information that was available on school shooters, murder suicides, all three of these things. And once again, I found evidence that where it was available, that the men who perpetrated these acts felt inadequate as men. So, I think it comes down to that the kind of boy or man who is likely to go off and shoot someone is a boy man who kind of feels very bad that he doesn't quite measure up to what he thinks he should be in terms of being a boy or man. And, you can easily connect it to the Columbine shooters. They were basically, they weren't very masculine. They were bullied at school, that kind of thing. So this is kind of the theory that I've come up with to explain gun violence. Right.
Excellent. Thank you. And for those who are watching live or watching the replay, there is the website I have up on our screen right now of the book, and also the link to the Tough Standard is toughstandard.com. I want to ask Dr. Levant, how much of an impact on the violence in a man's life is influenced by the way he is raised and media?
Well, I think we have to go back to boyhood. And I think we also have to include toys. Have you been in a toy store recently?
Yes.
Have you ever seen a more gender segregated environment?
No.
The more stereotyped environment where
Nope.
No, I mean, I think, the long story short of this whole thing is that we impose these gender stereotypes on children. We require that they conform to masculine or feminine norms depending on their biological sex. And these norms, are not really valid. They really don't fit people's behavior, and they change across cultures, across history. I'll give you some examples of that later if you're interested.
Please.
But what we're doing is we're forcing children to fit their personalities into a set of norms that may or may not match their actual personalities. Take any trait that's measured by the masculine norms. Let's take aggressiveness. If you measure 100 children, there is a bus aggression scale. You will find a distribution of scores that looks like this. You go from high to low, and most of them in the middle. If you have a boy who's on the low end, he's not very aggressive. He's kind of sweet. He likes to care for his baby sister. And you force him to be aggressive and tough. Think of the harm you're doing to his personality. And I could take that for any masculine trait or any feminine trait for that matter. So the media, the toys industry, parents, coaches, teachers, kind of all participate in shaping children's ideas that they have to conform to gender norms. And to me, that's the problem. We have to kind of let children be who they are. In Western civilization, we have this, we're kind of thought of as an individualistic society as compared to, countries in the East, which are more collectivistic. Mm-hmm. And we've long had in our culture these memes about being yourself. To thine own self be true. Be the self that one truly is. or as Oscar Wilde put it, I love this one, be yourself, everybody else is taken.
Taken, yes. Absolutely.
So, we have to get back to that and let children be who they are. It used to be the case back in the 50s that parents were freaked out if their boy showed any signs of effeminacy. I have a videotape that I sometimes play when I teach group counseling. It has 14 boys in it as patients at a child guidance clinic. 11, this was made in the 50s, I think, 11 were referred for effeminate behavior. It used to be the case that was a reason to refer a boy to child guidance if he exhibited effeminate behavior. Now, nowadays, of course, all 14 would be diagnosed with ADHD. Just to show you the shifting diagnosis patterns.
Yes.
But, people are kind of spooked out about children violating gender norms, and they shouldn't be. There's nothing sacrosanct. I told you, gender norms change. One of the gender norms today is restrict the expression of affection between men. Football players can swat each other on the butt, but that's about it, okay? You don't see them, embracing. But in the 19th century, the latter half of the 19th century, the norm was that men should be physically and verbally affectionate with each other. They slept in each other's beds. Abraham Lincoln did it with his close friend. They would kiss on the cheek. They would hug. So these norms are not carved in stone. They're not based in our genes. They are cultural determinations that change with the change in culture or the historical era. So there's nothing sacred about them. And I'm advocating that we do away with them. Let children be who they are.
Interesting. And you were saying, hopefully some people will be responding. Do have a question here from Twitch saying, will children not always have influences though? Is there really any way not to influence a child's personality as they grow up?
I think it depends. And that's the best answer you can give to any psychological question. because there's so many different circumstances that change, let me give you an example of some parents. In addition to an academic, I'm also a clinical psychologist, and I do psychotherapy and kind of focused on family psychotherapy. So I would see parents around problems with their children. Sometimes I would see their kids as well. And I had a couple that I was seeing who had a young boy about 6. I think, middle of the 6 or 7, around there. And they were saying, well, we want to raise our son, to kind of be who he is and not force these gender norms on them. And they kind of knew who I was because I publish and I go on shows like yours. So people kind of knew where I was coming from. And they said, well, we want to let him be expressive. We don't mind if he cries, but we're worried about how people outside our home are going to react to him. And I said, well, you're right to be concerned about that. But what you can do is you can kind of inoculate your son against that. You can tell him in age-appropriate language, in our house, we think it's okay for boys to cry because, after all, crying relieves sadness. But not everybody agrees. So you have to be aware of who you're around. And if you're around people who think boys should not cry, then you shouldn't cry, because if you do, they might get mad at you.
Understood.
So you help the boy sort of learn the display rules, but allow him to be sad if he's sad. There was a meme going around during the early part of the pandemic. It was a picture of a 8-year-old boy slumped in a stairwell. He was like this, obviously crying. And the caption was, if somebody had shown this boy empathy and compassion, rather than making him feel ashamed of himself for crying, there'll be one less angry man in the world 10 years from now.
Interesting. Yeah. With this aspect of masculinity violence, what I want to also get your take on, how much has the media impacted masculinity and violence?
It's a controversial topic. There are studies that on both sides of the question that show results on both sides of the question. It's hard not to think that, the media in the United States is just soaked with violence. It's hard not to think that it's hard to think that it doesn't have an influence. But I can tell you about a study one of my students did that looked at violent video games, which is kind of like violent movies.
Yeah.
And she was interested in whether, the literature is out, sort of the jury is out about whether watching or playing violent video games increases aggression. But she wanted to see if endorsement of masculine norms affected that relationship. This is kind of the depends question. So what she did is she gave them, all the boys, questionnaires that asked them to tally up their video game exposure, what kind of games they play. They took a questionnaire on aggression, and then they took my male role norms inventory that measures the extent to which they believe that boys and men should conform to these harsh traditional masculine norms. And what she found is that the boys who strongly endorsed masculine norms had a strong, positive, linear relationship between exposure and aggression. Mm-hmm. That is, more exposure. For every unit increase in exposure to violent video games, there is a unit increase in aggression. The boys who had low endorsement of masculine norms, there was no relationship between exposure to video games and aggression. So this is like one of those, it depends. That is, boys who believe that they have to be masculine and tough and unemotional and self-reliant and all of these things. Well, those boys will be more affected, right, by playing a violent video game. It'll make them more aggressive. Whereas a boy who's kind of more gender neutral and says, I freely express my emotions and I'm okay not being tough and all that stuff, he won't have that relationship.
Makes sense. Was there anything challenging about you writing the book? Or was there anything challenging about writing the book? Because obviously you've been involved in this journey for a long time. Did anything was challenging or any aha moments?
Well, the most challenging thing about writing the book was publishing it at the onset of the pandemic.
Wow.
Which kind of killed it.
Oh.
Yeah, but the writing of the book, like you mentioned, this is my 19th book, and and I worked with a very capable graduate student, Shana Pryor, it took over a year. I mean, these are not things you sit down in a night and do. You have to kind of find research articles. You have to read them. You have to make notes on them. You have to kind of develop a spreadsheet for everything you've found, so you can kind of keep everything, in order. And then you have to have an outline for how you're going to use all that information and present it. So there's writing a book, for anybody who's written a book, it's a straightforward process. It's long, it's tedious, it's painstaking, but there is a way you do it. It's an organized step-by-step way. So I didn't find the writing of it challenging. I found the marketing of it in the middle of a pandemic very difficult.
Well, can you share a little bit? Can you share a little bit about that? It's very interesting. You're talking about that. If you're comfortable, I'd like to hear some of the challenges you had in marketing it.
Well, I went the extra mile, and it was published by Oxford University Press, which is not only a very highly ranked university press, but it's a very large publishing house, so much so that it's as large as some B-level commercial publishers, and it has a footprint all over the world. And they marketed it as academic trade, meaning that they gave it a little bit more public relations. And me, not knowing the pandemic is around the corner, actually ponied up for additional support. I hired a person to create the website that you showed, the toughstandard.com, and I hired a publicist, and we managed to get, I got a piece in Salon. I got interviewed by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.
Sure.
We got some placements here and there. But once again, the pandemic just kind of squashed people's interest in a lot of things.
Absolutely.
And so the shock of the day was when I got my first royalty statement and found we'd only sold like 305 copies.
Wow. Well, let's get off that topic and let's before we went live, I asked you what, from your lens, what impact has the pandemic had on masculinity and violence? And you were bringing up some very interesting a survey or research I'd love you to share with us and the audience that I found. I had a concern, now I have a deeper concern.
Okay. Well, let me just kind of back up and take the big picture view. The American Psychological Association has published survey data that indicate that we not only have a coronavirus pandemic, but we have a mental health pandemic as well in the United States. And I can't imagine it's any different in Canada.
No.
We're two sister nations that have very similar cultures. The stress and strain of this whole thing, has been horrendous. So among the findings reported by the APA survey is a dramatic increase in depression, anxiety, substance use, particularly alcohol, weight gain, and also intimate partner violence. So just let's take a family with school-age children. Let's say it's a two-parent husband-wife family, not a lesbian family or a gay family, and they both work. And think about what they're trying to accomplish. Their children kind of are in virtual classrooms. They've never done that before. The younger child is having a great deal of difficulty with it. The mother has to basically either multitask and manage work if she's, entitled enough to kind of work from home, or if she can't, somebody's got to come in and pick up the slack. If she kind of has to, appear at her workplace to perform her job, then the husband has to pick it up, or somebody else in the family. You've got a grandparent around. So, the demands on that typical family of four that I was kind of outlining there during the pandemic have been extraordinary and creating extraordinary stress. And when you put people under stress, all kinds of bad stuff happens. And so, hopefully, we will get out of this at some time, though it's still not clear when. Even though we have these vaccines and now booster shots, and now also being able to vaccinate small children from, 5 to 11. But when are we going to get out of this? But the stress that this has put people under, and I'm just kind of taking an example of a family of four trying to juggle work and parenting and schooling. It's just horrendous. And it's no surprise to me as a psychologist that it has resulted in people breaking down. People break down. You put enough stress on people, they break down. It's sad. It's unfortunate. I think we need to, and also we, in the United States, we do not have the best mental health care system, that we could. We could do a lot more in terms of making mental health services available. I know that telemental has been a big thing, in the United States, where basically psychotherapy is provided via Zoom. some other, kind of utility like that. I think they use something that's a little bit more secure than Zoom, but so, it really has been very hard. And the intimate partner violence, both men and women are perpetrators of it, though men tend to be perpetrators of more severe violence and leading to hospitalizations and to death much more frequently than do women. But, both parents stressed out, you can easily see how the situation would break down and people would drink more, or they'd, eat more, or they'd, all of these kind of things. And so it has been terrible.
What do you feel the impacts have been of the pandemic on men and masculinity specifically, from what you've seen?
It's different than the 2008 recession. I don't see that the pandemic has basically had any unique effects on men that it hasn't had on women or on children. The 2008 recession, if you may recall, was called the man session because it had a disproportionate effect on men. And, basically more men were laid off or unemployed during the 2008 recession. It was the loss of manufacturing jobs and the kind of blue collar jobs that men gravitate towards. But this, the recession that's come with the pandemic, I don't think it's singularly, if there's any industry that's been affected, it's been like the entertainment and the hospitality industry more so than manufacturing. Manufacturing has continued, although it's shrunk from what it was pre-2008.
Sure.
But manufacturing has continued, but it's the hospitality industry, which could be people of any gender that work in the hospitality industry. But it's typically lower income people that work in the hospitality. So but as far as masculinity, I don't see that the pandemic has had any specific effects,
right, that
it hasn't had on pretty much everybody. It's been a terrible thing.
As you're going further in your journey with masculinity and men and violence, what are concerns that you have? After doing this book, what are some of the concerns that you have going forward when it comes to masculinity and violence? And what are some solutions?
Well, I think one of my big concerns is the politicization of masculinity in the United States. That during the Trump era, and basically Trump modeled a very degenerate form of masculinity. He talked about raping women, grabbing them by their genitals. He, he told his supporters to beat up protesters at his rallies. He basically modeled this very harsh, some people use the term toxic masculinity. I don't like that word, but kind of a very harsh, stern kind of masculinity. And a lot of his followers, as you can see by looking at the tapes of the January 6th insurrection, were what appeared to be working class men, by their dress and appearance. So, somehow working class men are now kind of linked up with this, in the United States anyway. I don't know if you have to tell me if this is the case in Canada, with this kind of far right refusal to accept the results of a presidential election and willingness to commit violence to get essentially the political results they want. So I worry a great deal about that, and I see masculinity as playing a huge role in that whole thing. I mentioned I don't like the term toxic masculinity for several reasons. Psychologists don't like to describe human behavior, any human behavior, as toxic. We like to be a little bit more neutral about it, but also it implies there's a good masculinity. And my thesis in that book is that masculinity is masculinity. We all know what it is, and it is problematic. It's problematic for three reasons. One is most boys are made to feel they have no choice but to be masculine. Masculinity is obligatory. We present that to preschool and elementary school age boys. Secondly, masculinity is problematic because it's oppressive. It's defined against femininity, and therefore it essentially denigrates womanhood. Masculinity is thought to be, is proposed to be dominant. Men are supposed to be dominant over women, but the masculinity that we write about, we call it traditional masculinity, is the masculinity of dominant groups in our society, particularly white, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied Christian men. So any other type of men of color, gay and bisexual men, Muslim and Jewish men, men who might have disabilities, are marginalized or subjugated in this masculinity. So it's oppressive. It oppresses women and minoritized men. But finally, the reason why masculinity is so problematic is that 45 years of research shows that it is linked with a large array of harmful outcomes, not just violence and aggression, but all other sorts of things. We haven't talked about health, but masculinity is linked with men's poorer health behaviors. And I recently got an article accepted studying this in the pandemic. Men, as you may know, are getting more severe illnesses, that is more ICU admissions and dying more frequently than women in the United States. Yep. Probably the same is true in Canada.
Absolutely. On average, we don't live as long as women, even before the pandemic, and it's probably even more of a gap during and post-pandemic.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And the chief reason for that, although in the pandemic there are some biological factors having to do with the angiotensin system and things I don't understand and won't talk about, but it's the behavior. It is the behavior that that basically men overall, not just in the pandemic, engage in more health risk behavior and less health promotion behavior. Men drink more, they smoke more, they don't wear seatbelts, they drive fast, they're aggressive and get into fights. All of these kind of things are health risks. They don't go to the doctor, they don't take medications prescribed. So in the pandemic, we found that masculinity, measured in two different ways, was associated with men's failure to adhere to the Centers for Disease Control recommended practices for mitigating exposure, like wearing a mask and all these kind of things. So, so even in the pandemic, masculinity is accounting for men's greater severe illness and greater death.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, our time is up. And it's been a quick time, but a very enlightening and educational and entertainment. One of the, I love the doctor because he knows how to laugh, which is good. It's a good time. Before we let you go, do you have any final words you'd like to share with our audience when it comes to masculinity and violence?
Well, I would like to share some words with parents, teachers, coaches, sure, interact with boys. I would ask you to be more mindful about how you interact with boys, to be mindful about imposing these outmoded stereotypes on boys, to try to take time to figure out who the boy is. Talk to him. What is he interested in? What does he like to do? And get to know that boy, and then treat him for who he is, not for who you think he should be. So I would like that message to go out to people who potentially influence boys to to let the boy be who he is.
Dr. Betts, the incredible words there, because, I help men and fathers. And that's one of the things when I first sit down with a man, tell me about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you can tell by their body reaction. Rarely, if at all, they've been really asked that question, and the person asking that question really wants to know about them.
Right.
Who are you? What makes you? What makes you tick? I want to know.
Yeah,
so
and
what you said about boys is the same thing with men.
Yeah, they may not, depending on the age of the boy, they may not give you as detailed an account as a man, but they kind of know what they like and what they don't like. And they know who their friends are and why they're friends. They can tell you all that kind of stuff. And then you can find out, boy, this boy is unique, and get to know the unique boy rather than feel he has to fit into this mold of the masculine boy. Right.
Well, incredible last little while we spent with Dr. Levant. And when we first had our conversation offline, I said, I don't want you to be a one and done. And as you can tell, this is why I don't want it to be a one and done, because he has so much rich personal and evaluated experience in regards to helping men. So again, if you're watching this up on the screen, I've given a look at the website, and the website is, again, of the book, thetoughstandard.com. And let's push this more than 300 and whatever sales, please and thank you.
Yeah.
that's
please
one
buy
thing.
my book.
Yes, buy his book. And what else I'm going to do is, if you want to find out about him, a little bit more about him, we're just going to put up on the screen his website. So if you want to find out more about him and all the fantastic things he has done, is doing, and will be doing, we're going to put up his website. There we go. Right there. And it's simply drronaldlevant.com.
Now, I should tell you, I put this website up for academics, but anybody is free to peruse it. But it's really wasn't designed for the public, unlike the Tough Standard was. But this shows kind of my books, my research, and what have you. And I do it so other academics can connect with me. But anybody's welcome to use it, but it may not be in the language that people are used to seeing.
Okay. Well, that is fantastic. And thank you for giving me a pass for putting that up. But appreciate everything you have done, you are doing, and you will be doing to help men, masculinity, and families around the world. One of our shared tonight, such a great, insightful information. I will be ordering your book. So there you go. and I know this lady, and she is of her word. So she's going to be ordering the book. She's actually a nurse, so she deals with stuff frontline like this all the time. So thank you so much for taking the time today, and to you and your family and your close friends, remember to give yourselves grace, and look forward to having you back.
Thank you, Dr. Vibe. It was a pleasure to be on your show.
My pleasure too. All right, folks, that was an incredible conversation, and we're going to get him back. We know we're going to get him back. Absolutely, because there's so many different areas of manhood, and masculinity that Dr. Levant can share with us and enlighten us in education, give us so much education. So I am Dr. Vibe. You are watching the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations. 2020 Best Podcast News Award, 2018 Innovation Award given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. Again, especially relevant in this conversation, I am the host of the only online show in the world that is for dads and fathers, sponsored by Dove Men Care. It's also co-sponsored by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization. And again, I am the board chair for the Global Food and Drink Initiative, which is a multimedia not-for-profit that amplifies the works of Blacks in food, drink, and travel. As always, I end off with this, and people starting to come in now. You got to watch the replay, but it was good. and as I say, live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get small to get stronger. Block assumptions, then aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Love, faith, and respect, and remember to give yourselves grace. And if If you're into it, please follow the Dr. Vibe Show on Facebook and on YouTube. You'll get notified when we have more epic conversations like this one. God bless, peace well, keep the faith, and walk good. Remember to give yourself grace.